Hello children, hope you're all fine and you have gone through the last two videos on object-oriented programming concepts. We learnt on computer languages, then we learnt on different types of computer languages, that is low-level language, high-level language. Under low-level language, we learnt on what is machine language and what is an assembler. We gave examples. I also explained how it works. Today we are going to learn on high level languages. Okay, we also learned high level languages uses English like phrase, and here we are learning on the three different types of high level languages in which we are concentrating more on object oriented programming. Clear? So when you learn about high level language, they use three different types. One is structured programming, the other one is procedural programming, and the third one is object oriented programming. For us, we are mainly focusing, or we are going to discuss more about object-oriented programming concepts. The structured language as well as the procedural language, just in brief, we will let you know what it is, just for your knowledge. Okay. So I shall be explaining the rest of the lesson with the help of the PowerPoint slides. I hope it is easy for you to take note also from the PowerPoint slides. Important points, I am showing it in the slides. Okay. So we shall now move over to the slides for further part of the lesson. Okay. So welcome to the part 3 of this lesson, Introduction to Object-Oriented Programming Concepts. So here we are learning about the types of HLL, nothing but higher level language. So the three types of high level language, one we call it as structure oriented, procedure oriented and object oriented. Okay. So we'll be learning on what is structure oriented programming language. So here structure oriented programming language means it uses modular approach. What do you mean by modular approach? Modular approach means a program. You mean a program means a set of instructions that will be divided into modules. It will be divided into different modules, and each module will be making use of a particular functionality. Okay? There they'll be using something called logical structures. Like I hope you know what is a flow chart. In your earlier classes you have learned what is a flow chart. So there they'll be learning doing with flow charts, functions, so many other different methodologies to write a program. And earlier languages like Algol and Pascal, they make use of structure-oriented programming language. Nowadays, we now make use of the structure-oriented programming language. Clear? So it is making a modular approach, means it is divided into small modules. Then it is using logical structures. There are different types like logical statements, flowcharts. All these things I made use of in the structure-oriented programming languages. Earlier languages like Pascal, Algol, they are using this concept of structure-oriented programming language. Clear? Then we'll be going with the next type of language, that is procedure-oriented programming language. Now, what is procedure? Procedure means a set of things which you're supposed to do, right? In this procedure-oriented programming language, here they are making use of functions. So, what are functions? What do you say? What is your function? When you talk in terms of computer terms, your function is to study. Your function is to read. Your function is to sleep, right? Your function is to eat. Your function is to walk. So you have so many functions, right? You as a person is having so many functions. Like that in our computer language also, when we are writing or creating a project, the project will have so many things to do. All these things, we write them as functions. Clear? Under a particular, for example, if my project is to take two numbers and add them, right? So one of my function is to add. So if I take two numbers, 3 and 4, I have to add 3 plus 4 and show it as 7. So I will be writing the programming under a function called add. And inside that add, I will be adding whatever is 3 or whatever 4, and then I will be showing the output as 7. So in this type of programming concept, what happens is these particular languages, they make use of functions. You will have so many functions. And these functions, for it to do that particular function, it needs data. Am I right? When I say you add 3 plus 4, what is your function? Your function is to add. But what are you adding? You are adding 3 and 4. This 3 and 4, you call them as data. From where will you get this data? The data could be obtained from where the user inputs, or the data could be taken from some other place also, right? So that when it is not given from the current machine, when it is taken from outside, you call them as global data. So these functions, what they do is they share global data, and data moves from one function to another. Maybe this 3 and 4, I have to take it from another function. So I have written another function, say input. Inside that function input, I am asking the user to give values, 2 values. So that 2 values are given under a function called input. Now, when I'm using a function called add, where are the 2 values taken from? The 2 values are taken from the another function called input, right? So the functions can share global data, and this data will move from one function to another. So from the input function, the data has moved over to the function called add. Clear? So here they are mainly concentrating on functions. So the programming language mainly makes use of functions. You will have n number of functions for a particular program. Clear? So if you take a software, then you will have so many functions, and all these functions may or may not be related to each other. They may or may not take the data from others. So some examples of procedure-oriented programming languages are BASIC, COBOL, Fortran, C. All these are earlier languages which use the concept of procedure-oriented programming language. So procedures means they are making use of mainly functions. I'll show you through a picture. This is my main program. Clear? In that main program, I have so many functions. Can you see? Function 1 maybe to take the value from the user, and the function to do add, maybe to subtract, maybe to divide, maybe to display, okay, maybe to find which is greater. So maybe this program contains so many functions. It's all divided into functions, and for this function to work, maybe it will take data from here, or for this function to work, it may take data from here. So the data can be taken from its own function, or it could be taken from other functions, right? So all your data comes either from that particular function or from other data, global data. And what happens if I am taking, for example, I have a function 1 where I am putting 2 values into 3 and 4. Right? So this 3 and 4 will be used in this function 5, which is doing addition. So 3 plus 4, you get it as 7. Or onto this 3, I add 5. So what will happen to my 3 value? 3 value will become 8. Are you getting it? So what happened? The value the user entered here was 3, but when I used in this function, that same value 3 was changed to 8. So the data also keeps changing. The value of the data also kept changing. Because it is sharing global data. The data could be taken from any function and it could be used anywhere. Clear? So you cannot say, oh, I entered only 3, so the value will always remain 3. No, the value will change. Maybe here it is changing to 8. In some other function, when it makes use of 3, maybe it is multiplying by 5, so it may change to 15. So the value what you entered keeps on changing. The data is floating. The data is floating from one function to another. So this was the concept used by procedure-oriented programming languages like for basic C and all that. Clear? And what happens in a POP? POP means procedure oriented programming, organization of data and function. So this is global data. Maybe these are global data. These datas are used by function 1, function 2, function 3, right? This global data is also shared by this function 2, function 3, function 4. Now you can see this function 2 takes data from also this source as well as this source. Clear? Similarly, this function takes data from this source as well as this source. So the functions may take value from anywhere. That is why we call them as global data. And here concentration was mainly given for creating functions. The data used value used to change. Clear? So there was no steady there is no steady nature for the data. The data kept on changing. Right? Whoever wants, they could use the data. And there were so many functions. The functions were n number, and these functions did not have any proper control over the data. They could use any data, whatever they want, they can use. It was all like that. Clear? That is in procedure-oriented programming. So what happens, there were also so many disadvantages of procedure-oriented programming concepts. Clear? Like characteristics we'll see. Emphasis was mainly on functions. As we saw in the previous slide, you were talking mainly on functions. And these functions, they used to share the global data. You know global data, it could access data from anywhere. And these values keep floating from one function to another. The value was 3, suddenly changed into 8. Value of 3 suddenly changed to 15. So each function, when they use the data, it kept on changing. It uses top-down approach of programming. Top-down approach of programming means the main program was divided into small programs. And each small programs did the programming and gave out the result. That's what we call it as top-down approach of programming. Because of all this, though there were some advantages, there were also some limitations. What were the limitations? Change in the data values function have to be changed. Maybe, as I said, your 3 changed to 8. But in another function, you want that function to work with the original value 3. Was it possible? No. Because one function used 3 and changed it to 8. When the another function wanted, instead of 3, you had there as 8. So what happened? The functions could not work properly and could not get a proper result. And it was not suitable to solve the complex programs. Complex problem is very big area of software. Like when you have to work on large programs like projects, it was not possible because you need to follow so many functions. And managing so many functions was quite difficult. Clear? So these were the main limitations of Pure. Main thing is the data value kept on changing. So when a function we wrote was supposed to do with a particular data, that when it happened to access that data, the value changed. I gave you an example. For example, in A, I am storing 4. I say A is equal into 4. One function is using 4 into 3. So what I am 12. So A became 12. But another function, I want to work with A as 4 only. Is it possible? No, because since another function used it, the value already from 4 changed into 12. So the output what we required was not very correct. So there were, these were the main disadvantages. Like the data had no real proper value. It kept on changing according to the functions being called. And for complex problems, it was not very good to use these type of procedure-oriented programming because having too many functions also was little bit difficult. Clear? So keeping in all this mind, they brought in the third type of programming languages, which we call it as object-oriented programming concept. Okay, now what is this object-oriented programming? This is where we are going to deal with. Okay, one example is Java. Java is a high-level language which makes use of object-oriented programming. C++ is another. PHP, Python, all these makes use of object-oriented programming concepts. How is it happening? Here, We learned data is there, functions are there. So what happens? Separate space or separate memory is given for data and functions. And every problem, you are dividing them into small entities called objects. Your full program is divided into small entities called objects. So in detail, what are objects, what is data, what is functions, you are learning in the coming sessions. So now you need not break your head. Oh, this teacher talking about new things, what should I do? No. Clear? Don't worry. This is the main concept which we are concentrating on. You must remember, like, though the earlier programming languages, they made use of functions and data, they were all could be accessed whenever required, but that was not what we need. So we went in for a new type of programming concept that was called as object oriented. Here there was a separate memory placed for both data and functions. Clear? Like we say, there is an object called A. And object A had its own data and functions. You had another object called B. It also had data and functions. You have another object called C. It also had data and functions. And all the three objects could interact with each other. Clear? The data from object A could be used by object B, could be used by object C, but with the help of certain restrictions. All the disadvantages of procedure-oriented programming were overcome with object-oriented programming. Here also they used modular approach. Modular approach means like it was divided into modules, but there was clear control about the data, how it moved from one function to another, who could access this data, what type of functions we could make, which all functions can make use of this data. All this was clearly maintained. So what happened was, this object-oriented programming made our programming much simpler. The data was quite secure. The data was very secure. So there were many advantages of this object-oriented programming concept. Now we'll see what are the main features of this object-oriented programming concept. Importance to data than functions. So we said the data you cannot just keep changing, right? So what we did was, in object-oriented programming concept, we gave more importance to data. The value was kept very secure. Though there were many functions, there were restrictions for the functions to access the data. Everybody cannot just go and access the data, no. So there were some restrictions, and your complete program was divided into objects. So your program was divided into objects, and objects can be used as a bridge to have data flow from one function to another. Just in the previous slide you saw, right? You have three objects, object A, object B, object C. These objects could interact with each other. The functions could be made use of. All that was possible, but with some restriction. Since what is meant by restriction means the data was kept secure. How did we keep the data secure? There we brought in a concept called data hiding. Okay, in detail about data hiding, what is data? Little meaning of data hiding means what? You are keeping the data hidden. Not everybody can access it. That is data hiding. All that we are learning in detail. As I said, need not break your heads now itself. Data hiding enhances security in programs. So the data what you gave was kept very secure. Every function cannot just like that go and take the data, which happened in procedure-oriented programming. Okay, so that was the main idea behind this object-oriented concepts. Then software for complex tasks can be easily developed, which was quite difficult in procedure-oriented programming. The earlier type of programming language, they could not easily access them. But here in object-oriented programming, or even complex problems could be easily solved. Now we'll see what is the differences between POP and OOP. POP means procedure-oriented programming. OOP means object oriented programming. Now, in procedure oriented programming, emphasis was on functions. We saw there were so many functions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I showed you the picture. In object oriented programming, we also had functions, but you are giving more importance to data. Here, importance was given to functions. It allows free flow of data. As I said, the functions could easily make use of the data, but here the data is restricted to use. Data cannot be used by all the functions. There were some restrictions. How we give restrictions, that we'll be learning it. Okay. Follows top-down approach, means the full program was divided into modules, and then the result came up. But here it follows bottom-top approaching, means from the objects, from the functions, we get the results, and all these results built together becomes your program. So top-down approach means here the program is divided into different modules, but in object-oriented programs, different objects will build up your final result. Okay, that is follows bottom-top programming approach. Clear? So this is mainly for your section A questions, where you will have differences. This is an important question. Then what is object oriented programming approach? What is procedure oriented programming approach? Which are the examples of the languages which makes use of structured programming, which makes use of procedure oriented programming, which makes use of object oriented programming. All these examples you must know, and what it mainly contains, the characteristics also you must be knowing. The next session onwards, you will be going with in detail about object oriented programming. So there you will find it more interesting. Clear? So I know a little bit of hard stuff for you to push it into your mind, but still don't leave the continuity, because then and there you have to go through the videos. Otherwise you will, because you are getting a class after maybe 1 week or so, so only in the next week you are getting the next class. So by that time, don't forget these things. Take a notebook, maintain a notebook. Please do write what is shown in your slides so that it helps you. Okay. So we'll meet in the next session. So till that, take care. Okay, bye.